Dark Frog Social Media presents How to Ice Dye with Zaida P. Let's take a look at what is needed to do an ice dye, how to actually do the ice dye, and then the wonderful results you will get when you finish. To prepare, you will need soda ash, some containers for both the pre-wash and for drying, a straining rack or cooling rack, and white materials such as cotton. This is your common everyday household cooling rack that you would have for your oven that can be used for tie-dye as well. Zaida recommends that you use stainless steel containers for this so that you don't ruin any of your plasticware that you use in your kitchen. This is a white cotton t-shirt that is going to be used, and currently here it is seen soaking in the container. The liquid solution is 1 cup of soda ash for every 1 gallon of water. Now we see the dyes that Zaida will be using for some of the projects that she will be showing here on this video. Now let's hear from Zaida herself about the next step.
After soaking for 20 minutes in the soda ash dye fixer, we take it and we drain it and we bring it out. And then we'll roll it, which will come next in a few minutes.
After squeezing out the excess soda ash water solution, you can do some very interesting folding techniques with this. Here we see Zaida using a clip to start twisting the t-shirt so that it can be set into an interesting pattern. As she turns the clip, you'll see that Zaida will start forming pleats as well, so that you can get interesting lines from the shirt itself. And so we see a twist here, and then Zaida takes a moment to start making the pleats. You see a couple that are being made here, and then as she twists again, she will make more pleats. Now this is interesting, but also can be a little tough setup. So I think next time Zaida will use a thicker clamp so that it can be easier to turn with. Here we see Zaida further along as the twists begin to really get into a nice tight roll. Again, you see with Zaida and her helper that they're making some pleats, making something so that it can be used when the dye is placed upon it to form interesting circular patterns across the entire shirt. As noticed before, you really have to, or it's best to get a really tight twist on it when you're doing something like a t-shirt, or actually any form of material that you're using. You want to get a nice tight turn so that the pleats can be done so that you can have an interesting pattern when you finish. Here's Zaida and her helper checking the pleats themselves and start trying to wind them around prior to another twist of the clamp. So if possible, use a bigger clamp, or use a clamp that you know that can handle the thickness of the material. And it always helps to maybe have a helper as well, especially if you know exactly what you want to do. You can provide that information to your helper so that they can do their part of it as well. So a little bit of flattening out so that we can get more tight coils to the material itself. You see how they're checking the tight form itself, giving themselves more time to be able to tighten on here. Double checking that. And now, as the coils are just about as tight as possible with the shirt, Zaida will double check everything, get it into a nice spot. And then another thing you will need that I forgot to mention for your prep work is you're going to need some tape. Whether it be painter's tape or masking tape, you will need it so that you can bind the entire project together so that when you apply the dye and then apply the ice, you will have a great setup for laying it out. So here's Zaida applying the painter's tape. Carefully make sure that she's not getting the tarp and or drop cloth that you may use, which is another thing I forgot to mention in the prep as well. If you don't have a crafting table to work from, using a drop cloth of any sort will help keep the dye away and the water and soda ash solution away from your table. So there they are, getting the tight spiral done using the tape. Now, you may want to do a couple of additional wraps with the tape around. You see the assistant here is holding it so that Zaida can get another roll, another strip from the roll, and apply it to the circle. Once you have a tight taped around your project, we can then start with the next step. So here Zaida is finishing it up, and we're going to move on to the actual dyeing part. Once you have your project taped off and ready to go, now it's time to apply the dye. Depending on what you want to do, you will pick out your dyes and then use something like a teaspoon or a tablespoon, different ways that you can apply the dye across and or in different lines. As you see Zaida here, she is doing the line method and she is applying her first color across the damp t-shirt. So as she finishes the line, she goes back to make sure that she has the depth and the areas to the level that she wants. You can go light or heavy depending on what you'd like to do. So when she finishes, she covers up the first dye and makes sure that there's no spillage with it, and starts work with the second one. Now, a good rule of thumb is to try to keep your spoon dry and not on the shirt itself, because you may have some leftover from the previous dye being used. I also recommend using multiple spoons to make sure that you don't have any spillover of the dye. Unless that is what you're going for, then by all means certainly go for it. So here's Zaida working on the second line. You see she's going heavy with this. The heavier, the darker the dye will come out. The lighter, of course, the lighter. You may also have some issues with giant white spots if you don't go heavy. Now, if that's the look you're going for, again, by all means, certainly go for it. Use your creativity and do what you feel is good for you and for the people you are doing this for. Here is a quick shot of the dye that was used, which was gold. And now Zaida works her way on the next color. As you see, from Zaida's point of view, she is working from left to right. Since she is right-handed, that is the recommended way, so that you don't have overlap and spillover of one dye into the other area. As you see, she finishes back up, closes it, and then moves on to the next dye. So because, as we mentioned, she is right-handed, she flips or turns it over. Here's a shot of the dye she just put on there, which was fuchsia. And now she goes for the next color. She has turned it so that she can readily use the right hand of hers to apply the dye. As you see there, there's a little bit of what I was talking about with the dye being pulled over because the spoon got a little bit wet. However, didn't cause any issues with this t-shirt, so don't worry. The end result, I think you will be as astounded as I was when I first saw it on how great it turned out. So Zaida's now moving on to her fifth color, which originally I believe that was where she was going to stop with this project. And that was turquoise that was just applied. So as Zaida works her way to her fifth color, we get another kind of a sideways shot of it. And remember, you don't have to go in lines as Zaida is doing. Zaida recommends you think about your creativity. Think about the people you want to have this for. Think about what you like. And just go for it. That's the great thing about ice dyeing, is that it's really all about you and the medium of the t-shirt and or materials. Upon completion of the dye, Zaida then moves on to the ice portion. What makes ice dye ice dye? So be sure you have plenty of ice on hand, because what you want to do is cover every inch that you can with ice inside of your project, inside of that tape. So here she is applying ice, couple of cubes at a time, to make sure she have the best, fullest coverage of ice on top of that. This is just as an important step as applying dyes to that t-shirt. You want to let the ice melt and work its way through the t-shirt itself, and it will drain through the cooling rack as we wait. This is the part upon finishing that Zaida will let this sit for up to 24 hours. And you can come back and look at your project yourself as the ice works its way through. As mentioned before, you see that Zaida is trying her best to make sure that every bit is covered by the ice. The more ice you can get on your project for it to filter through the dye, then in through the t-shirt and into the bottom of the basin or the container that you are using, the better. As you see here, assistant here is melting a piece of ice and then crammed it into that corner, because as mentioned, the more ice the better. It doesn't hurt to have more ice on your project as it melts and works its way through. Upon finishing the ice, Zaida decides that she wants to take that extra step to apply additional soda ash onto the ice. This will help as it works its way through the t-shirt. And from here is the finished product. This is 24 hours later. After we take the tape off, we are then in the next phase, which is to actually rinse your creative project. Here is Zaida wearing gloves because there is still a lot of dye in the t-shirt itself, so we want to make sure that hands are not stained, especially if you're doing multiple projects at one time. So we start with cold water and we start working our way through the t-shirt so that the excess dye is rinsed off. Once again, you definitely want to use a stainless steel sink for this, as you don't want there to be any residual dye that could stain your sink. As you get through the first couple of passes, you want to squeeze and unwrap the t-shirt. Work your way from what you would consider a top to the bottom, squeezing and rinsing as you work your way through it. After you have a decent amount of rinsing going on and you make the choice that it's time to move on from cold water to what will be a warmer water, Zaida continues to rinse out the t-shirt. As we mentioned, she wants to make sure it's done. Now she adds the hot water, which will slowly warm up and go from a cold to a warm cold to a warm and then to a warm hot. You don't need to go to an extreme hot, just something that you can have that will make sure you just get that excess dye out. And you also don't want to burn your hands. So very important that you stay at a level that's comfortable for you and your hands. Once again, this is the rinse part of the ice dye, going from a cold to a cold warm to a warm hot water rinse with your hands, constantly squeezing and also checking on the water itself to see if there's any additional dye that's coming out. You want to go till there's little to almost no dye that comes out when you rinse it and squeeze it out with your hands. As you see here, Zaida is checking to see the dye content of the water and also if there's any other folds or plates that she may have missed while she was rinsing previously. Working away and squeezing every couple of inches of the material itself. Now Zaida likes to use cotton material for the t-shirts, and then she has other material for other projects that she will be working on, and we will show those later on at the end of this video. So it looks like we've gotten most, if not all, of the excess dye out. Zaida continues to unpleat everything and make sure that every nook and cranny has been washed before we have one more wringing out, and then we will lay the t-shirt across a drying cloth or rack, whichever you prefer. Zaida this time is using the drop cloth that you saw earlier in this video. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. How to Ice Dye by Zaida Pawlowski. So as you see here, after it was rinsed out thoroughly, Zaida laid out the t-shirt for us to see here in this video. Has noticed the beautiful circular patterns that she got with the tight coil that she did earlier in the video. All the colors are there. They're vibrant. They look fantastic. So there's the green and there's the gold and there's the blue and the red and oranges are eye-popping and look fantastic. This was very well done by Zaida, and she hopes that your projects will look as good as what she had here. Before we leave you, Zaida thought it would be a great idea to show you some other examples that she had from the ice dyeing process. Now this was done with muslin material, and you see some of the fantastic shapes and dyes that she used. To start with, it may not be a bad idea to get at least 5 to 7 dyes, different various colors that you can be used in your projects. Here's a nice one that goes from a really dark green orange working its way out to a blue. Very fantastic. Here's an example of the sewing ends that Zaida did for this project, and we can now use these materials, squares that she did, for various projects and various types of crafts. These will be made available at the Be the Light Craft Fair next month, November 12th, in Cedar Park. We hope that you enjoyed this and have a great day.